Hey, what's going on? My name is Bianca, and before we jump into the topic at hand, a little bit about myself is I am chief storyteller for the A21 campaign. We are a global anti-human trafficking organization that has the audacious goal of abolishing the injustice of slavery in the 21st century. Secondly, I am Hispanic and I'm a female, so if I yell and shout and use my hands and get emotional, just ignore me. It kind of just comes with the package. And third and last but not least, much to my chagrin and much to my promise that I would never marry a pastor as a pastor's kid, saying, oh, no way, pastors are so weird, and the worst of them is missions pastors. Never say never to God, because I stand before you, and I am now officially a pastor's wife. I got married about 2 years ago, thank you, Jesus, because I didn't know if that was ever going to happen. And I fell in love with an amazing man who has a heart for God and a heart for God's people. And now I'm officially a crazy pastor's wife. So as we go into the topic at hand, the topic discussed today is on the topic of forgiveness. This is part and parcel and much. It means so much in my life personally, because growing up in ministry, you can either get, bitter or get better, as the Christian cliche says, but you see a lot. And as a pastor's kid, I've seen my parents and many in ministry wounded by people, but then disqualifying themselves because they weren't able to forgive. And so I want to enable us and empower us to be leaders who can freely forgive, as freely as we have been forgiven, that we can forgive others. It's been said that holding on to resentment and unforgiveness is like drinking poison and expecting someone else to die. And we say that phrase and it just rolls off our lips like it's so easy, but we're rarely fond of the alternative to that. And on the surface, forgiveness is totally and completely unsatisfying. Really, we want to be angry. In fact, I could sit here and think of methodical ways of how retribution is going to pan out, and I could think of all these things that I could have said to you and should have said to you, and I'll tell you, in the moment of an argument, I can never think of a really good, verbal assault, but when I'm in my car and when I'm by myself, like an hour later, I could rip you a new one. I know, I'm a carnal Christian, really. So this issue of forgiveness is not something that I'm waxing philosophically about, or that I've fully conquered and been redeemed from. But I will say that I am understanding a theology of forgiveness from a very healthy place, and that's what I want to share today. I vividly remember serving in ministry. I've been in ministry for over 15 years, and 7 of those years were in student ministries. And I vividly remember a night. This was a turning point in my ministry life, a turning point in my spiritual life. But I remember vividly sitting in my car and wringing the steering wheel so tight that my knuckles were white, and I was so angry. I was fuming. That I had served in student ministries for 7 years. I was part of the core leadership team, part of the pioneer between my youth pastor and myself, building up an amazing youth ministry that would take Jesus not just within the walls of youth group, but take him outside of the walls of youth group, and building the community and building leadership and turning students into student leaders. And it was just a wonderful, amazing time of service. But if you're in ministry, you know that ministry takes so much of your real life. I mean, finances and wherewithal and time. I mean, it consumed my entire dating life, for crying out loud. But I was passionate about serving God's people, and I loved being able to stand shoulder to shoulder with people that I trusted. Well, towards the end of my season in youth ministry, I began to feel that I was on the outside of an inside joke. That there had been maybe hushed tones and whispers that I felt were directed about me, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Well, something that I wanted to keep private. My whole life was kind of like on an expose. As a pastor's kid, everyone feels like they have a right to know you and talk about you and think everything they want to think about you. And I was so trying to safeguard my personal community, and there was something that I wanted to keep private just because it was new and budding. Well, it turns out that I had been exposed, and word got back to me. And if that wasn't painful enough to be exposed by your volunteers and your leadership and even a few of the students, the dagger to my heart was realizing that the person who had brought this to light was the pastor that I was serving directly underneath. I was devastated. I was heartbroken. I wanted to scream. I wanted to fight. I wanted to pull hair. I'm a crazy Latina. I was about to pop somebody's tires. I was angry. I was fuming. Well, once I cried and put on sackcloth and threw up ashes and, being extra dramatic that I am, I realized that I needed to do something against my will, and that was forgive this person. So Proverbs 25:22 says, if your enemy is hungry, give him food to eat. If he is thirsty, give him some water to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head, and the Lord will reward you. Now, the first part of that, if your enemy is hungry, give him something to eat. If he's thirsty, give him some water. I had a hard time doing. But I felt like, I could do the first part of that because the second part is heaping hot coals on his head. That's right, and then I'll be rewarded. Okay. So I knew that I needed to apologize, and I kind of felt like, well, maybe, just maybe, this will be my act of revenge, my act of vengeance. I will heap coals on his head. Well, I contacted him, and I asked if we could speak. And as I spoke to him, I started revealing why I was so hurt, and also coming to him and saying, I need to ask you for forgiveness. And I feel like forgiveness needs to take place. What I wasn't expecting in that moment was for the script to be flipped on me and have him say that he doesn't accept my forgiveness and then turn it into a monologue as to why I was wrong, and that's the reason why he wouldn't accept my forgiveness. I was thoroughly confused and angry and indignant once again. In that moment, I finally understood the words of my father. Forgiveness is a form of suffering. To forgive somebody is to willfully embrace the wound that somebody else has given to you. Many pastors and preachers speak about forgiveness. It's like this great virtue and a sign of maturity, which it is. But there's a reason so many people can't forgive. It requires a willingness to suffer. That's why this topic is so hard to discuss with people. I don't want you to be disqualified from ministry. I don't want to be disqualified from ministry. I don't want it to mar our marriages or mar our relationship with kids or mar our relationship with friends, but to be leaders in the sense of understanding a theology, if you will, of suffering and of forgiveness. But this isn't any type of suffering. It's, like I said, it's embracing the wound that somebody else has inflicted upon you. Now, this can feel completely and utterly unnatural. When a person hurts you, or me, our typical reaction is to fight back, to get back, to inflict not just the same amount of pain, but even more. You hurt me, I want to hurt you even more. You wounded me, I want your wound to be even deeper. And we call this getting even, but it's not getting even. It's actually getting revenge, and it goes deeper. And we tell ourselves that everything's okay. Our actions are okay. I have a right to be angry. I have a right not to forgive them. They deserved what I told them. They deserved what I said. That's right. I'm going to show them. Well, in those moments, I've been there before, where we want to echo the words of Kanye West. How can something so wrong make me feel so right? Yeah, we've been there. Or maybe you're extra holier than me, and I totally realize that. But we have a deep, innate desire to get back. And in doing so, it makes us feel good momentarily. Let's just acknowledge that it does. But retribution is a false sense of justice. We don't get even, like I said. We got ahead. And that vengeance will come back and rear its ugly head. We will receive payback. And then that payback will receive another form of payback. And vengeance is a downward, never-ending spiral. It makes not losers of the wounded. It makes losers of everyone involved. Now, this is the crazy side of the spectrum. People who say, vengeance isn't mine, thus saith the Lord. Vengeance is mine, thus says Bianca, or thus says you. Now, the other side of the spectrum are those that would never seek out vengeance, would never seek out retribution. They would never act that out or hurt somebody that way, but instead, they say nothing, and they hold on to the wound. They nurse the wound and the grudge with the refusal to forgive. I will withhold my words of forgiveness. I will pretend everything's okay, but I am frosty on the outside. I do not forgive you. And it's willfully refusing to forgive and refusing to forget. Something inside of these type of people, and myself at times too, is something inside of us believes that when we hold on and withhold forgiveness, that we allow ourselves to be in control of the situation. But that's a big lie. The truth is that it kills us, and it slowly gnaws at our soul, and we imprison ourselves on this side of the spectrum. Galatians 5:1 says, "It is for freedom that we have been made set free." And the truth is that Christ has set us free by forgiving us. We have a moral obligation to then free others. And if freeing others is an act of forgiveness, then that is what we are called to do. Now, God has called his people to forgive and to not have either side of the spectrum. Ephesians 4:32 says, "We are called to forgive much because we have been forgiven much." We are called to be agents of forgiveness. Another way of saying this is that we are called to suffer because suffering is a direct result of forgiveness. When we have been wounded by somebody or marred by somebody, our natural reaction is to make it right and to get even. If something's broken, we want it fixed. And let me tell you something. How you fix those wounds is through the balm and the salve of forgiveness. But in doing so, it places the demand on the one who's been wounded. The one who has been wounded has to incur the weight and the cost of forgiveness. It asks for the one who has been wronged to absorb the sin committed by another. And let me ask you, is there anything more painful than that? Forgiveness means that we cancel the debt at a personal expense. And we see this in Matthew 18 when Jesus tells a story about a master and a servant, and the servant owed a debt of millions and millions of dollars. The servant asked for leniency. The servant asked for forgiveness. "Please, sir, can you remove this?" And master completely erases the debt of millions of dollars. Now, the master willingly absorbed the loss, knowing that he wasn't going to see a penny back. And this is what we see in our spiritual master, in the life of Jesus. He absorbed the pain, the shame, the guilt, the sin, and the brokenness of the world when he hung on a wooden cross on Calvary. He hung on a torture device for our sin, and he incurred such a great loss and such a great pain. And I ask you again, is there anything more painful than that? It's this kind of forgiveness, it's this kind of suffering that we are called to imitate. We're called to absorb the offense of others and let go of the debt. This may seem impossible. However, we must remember that whatever sin has been committed against us has already been absorbed by Jesus. And when we long for justice to be served, when we want retribution, we cannot forget that at the cross, justice was already served. Now, I don't know if it makes it easier, but I want us to discuss in a healthy sense of recalibrating our mind and understanding and deeply recognizing these truths, that there's an agony in forgiveness. Now, you may be listening, watching at home, watching at work, watching at church, and you know exactly what I mean. You've forgiven someone who has wounded you deeply, but in doing so, it's as if your heart has been ripped in two. It's the most agonizing and painful thing of knowing you hurt me so deeply. You wounded me so deeply. You've marred me forever. But I forgive you. That is painful. But our hope in those moments, the beauty in those moments, when we come face to face with the pain of forgiveness, is we discover a risen Christ, risen Jesus, who says, I know what that feels like, because I too have done the same thing. When I look back at that night, when kind of everything imploded in my spiritual life, I felt incredibly betrayed. I felt broken. I felt ashamed. I was embarrassed. When I look back at that night several years ago, something inside me was discovered for the very first time. Forgiveness is a form of suffering, but for those who are willing to endure it, we see and discover the heart of Jesus. And that's why the topic of forgiveness is so powerful. For when we are able to forgive, we liberate the one who has sinned against us. And in doing so, we liberate ourselves, just as we are liberated through the forgiveness and the blood provided by Jesus at the cross. So, whether that act of forgiveness needs to be given to your professor, whether that act of forgiveness needs to happen between a spouse or a best friend, or dare I say, Maybe that forgiveness needs to be asked of Jesus Christ because you're angry with God in this season of life. I pray that we suffer well. I pray that we suffer valiantly in finding liberation that forgiveness brings, and that it may lead not only you and not only me, but many others into the arms of Jesus Christ and experiencing and knowing that he knows what that pain feels like. And in doing so, like Luke 7:47, he who has been forgiven much loves much. We have been forgiven much, and because we've been forgiven much, I hope and pray that we learn to forgive others, and in doing so, we not only love God, but we love others as we love ourselves. Hi, my name is Bianca, and Hey, what's going on? My name is Bianca, and I'm excited to be part of Hey, what's going on? My name is Bianca, and I'm excited to be part of Hi, my name is Bianca. I was so crazy. I'm Latino. We're crazy. I was about to poke somebody's tires out.